So what I would like to do is ask, first of all, what do you have any questions based on the last session? And that last session was collective shepherding. This is individual, looking much more at the individual shepherd. And then on the meeting that I'll have in the middle of the week, it'll drill down even further into that. But the shepherding role, what it entails, and what it's like, is what this lesson is. But do you have anything that might have confused you or flagged and you would say, I'd like to ask a couple questions? Okay. Is this a bashful group, Ray? Is this a bashful group? No. Okay, we got one here. Yes, Henry.
So how do you know, or how would you determine if you should be a shepherd because you want to be one? How would you figure out if you should be a shepherd?
I would say, okay, we have scriptures that talk about it's great to have ambition to be a shepherd, right? We have that. But it doesn't mean you can't be if you don't have the ambition. And it doesn't mean because you have the ambition that there wipes out everything else. So I would say there's a bit of an algorithm, a couple things you want to see line up. The first one being, do you have the qualities in the heart to shepherd according to the other people around you? The people whose opinions matter the most, spiritual-minded people. That would be really, really top. Gray hair is not enough of a... You don't have to worry about that, bro. You know. But, so anyway, that would be the prime characteristic. Spiritual people around you. But good question. Yes?
I think it's a great idea with the shepherding, but with conferences, you get in there, you get excited, it starts, it gets great momentum, and then it dies. How do you keep the momentum going, keep it so it doesn't go away, and keep people fresh-minded?
For an individual person?
Yes.
Okay. The biggest plus is if there's a real group dynamic going on. There's a group sense about it. If we are working in isolation, we peter off. It's similar to why evangelism work when you go out in twos. There's that sense of accountability and follow-up and how did it work and that sort of thing. So I think having a group dynamic. Good question. Others? Yes.
My question, I know you mentioned about like how make everyone feel needed and important in the church. In this sense, I might not use the right word, but like, how do you help people to get rid of like a typical image of being disciple, but really thoughtful disciple when they have a limitation in challenges? Like,
okay, I think that would probably be something more towards later on in this.
Okay.
But if I don't, we can talk privately, but I think it would come out later.
So even actually the example you provided, again, with trying to save the company,
Yeah.
refer to a scripture. A lot of these concepts, at least I've heard them in different facets of my career and life. But that where humanism comes in, and there are times I'm not sure how do I discern what is spiritual and what is humanism. How do I balance that in a church setting with helping somebody?
Okay. In a given group of broadly defined shepherds or in an eldership, there should be somebody that's of who they are that is feeling the burden to keep the group spiritual. Because if it isn't, you don't have somebody like that, in role definitions, you will find it becomes managerial. It can even become bureaucratic. Let me give you a real example from a church of about 5,000 in a mainline church in Abilene. They're so big that they have 30 to 40 shepherds at any given time, formal elders. But they have 6 that are so good at administration and business and all of that, that's what they do. And the other 24 to 34, whatever it is, are to focus on the spiritual well-being of the church. And then they rotate so that you don't get stuck in one divot for a long, long time. But there's a sense in the other larger group that there's somebody running point to make sure that this is God's church running on his principles. But since there is a aspect of the church that is administrative, law, ethics, finances, you need that other category. So I think it's about ownership of roles. So, yeah.
So, the dynamic in the scriptures primarily has to do with men. So I'm really curious how to work together with our sisters. We have a couple single moms, for example, here that are older that could really help with women. And so what does that look like as you're building a shepherding elder,
Yeah. Right.
Because, the examples you gave was all the guys coming together. And,
Right. It's a good question for more reasons than what you're probably bringing up, just because of what is the role of women in the church and so forth. And that's being revisited by teacher groups right now in our fellowship. But one way to get ahead of all that that's very smart and safe is to use a secular term, is to create a matrix. Matrix is, these are our especially gifted Christians in this realm of expertise, male or female, and we want to factor them into the equation on such and such a topics. So, and then you could make a list of the kind of things that would come up as topics. And gender's not a factor there. That's just like, who are the spiritual people, men and women, that can fulfill those categories. But even with a male-oriented eldership itself, when that happens, certain decisions you would kind of create in advance. Okay, who are we going to bounce things off of as an advisory group? And then to test it before we roll it out to the whole church, who's that next level? And in that second and third level, you definitely want to have women in there, And most healthy churches that I know are not afraid to have women present at any of the discussions. Sometimes it's not practical because of kids and life, stuff like that. But I think it could be kind of you create a sheet. What are the topics? What should be administrator, elder, evangelist, teacher, whatever? Who do we have? That's another thing. What are we working with? And then you start to populate it, your matrix, and then you pray over it, and you adjust it, and you tweak it, and you revisit it from time to time. The first time I've seen that work in a church, or introduced in a church, was in Florida a couple of years ago, and they wanted to get ahead of the curve because they had major decisions coming up. Primarily financial, but also hiring, which is also financial. And they wanted to be able to present this to the church. And if the church said, oh, that makes sense, based on who we have and the soundboards and the core leadership of this church, that makes sense. So now when these decisions come up, they go, did they follow the script? Did they follow the plan? So, yes?
Forgive me if you covered this at the very beginning. The term shepherd and elder, are we using those? Those two separate things, right? Or are those interchangeable?
In the Old Testament, there was formal and there was informal elders. And shepherding also can be used broadly. Like, never do you see David called a shepherd in the Kings, but he is at the end of Ezekiel 34. So sometimes we're just saying this is a descriptor of a role, and then other times it is an official role with authority and responsibility. So here in this lesson, how do you want me to be careful, Ray, on this? Invited me to speak on this topic. Do you want me to be broad or zero in on the official role of an elder who is a shepherd? Broad or tight and close?
I would like tight and close.
Okay.
I think we heard broad, so.
Okay.
Because that's kind of, because even stepping back, so we selected, some couples, to be a part of that training group. I'd be really interested, and we'll talk more about this, of course, but there seems to be no consensus on how that should be selected. I've seen and heard of many different, where the whole congregation chooses a group to be trained in that way to, a leadership, to on and on. And so, because that's going to be a question. I'm confident, though it's not been asked, people are thinking, well, how'd you pick this group?
Okay.
Right? That's a legitimate
Boy,
question.
we could actually have a whole session on that.
Right.
When the crisis happened in 2003, the church in Atlanta was so in disarray that they did the wide open approach and 311 names came forward.
Right.
Single men, new Christians, young single men, new Christians.
Right.
And wow, some have been multiple divorces and all this sort of thing. So we saw that happen. We go, we're not going to do that. So we had 2 elders in Chicago. And so Jim Leffler, an elder, and I sat down and developed a process by which the whole church would be involved. But we were going to have mechanisms for vetting. And so what we did is pre-teaching about the criteria, their emotional system, their temperance, their evenness, their wisdom, all that sort of thing. And then we asked the church to set names after we put the bar up here. We had 27 names that came forth. And by the way, I have this document. You could edit it if you want to tweak it as a template. But the 27 names came forth. We asked a group of men who met all the qualifications of eldership as we could tell, but who said, we're not ready right now. We don't want to be considered. So they became part of a soundboard vetting group who would stand before the church to make sure that we weren't picking our buddies, because the church was suspicious about us at that time. Thank you, Henry.
Right.
Yeah.
Not you, Henry.
Not this Henry. Another Henry.
My other friend, David. He was a friend too. But so that group of people were able to stand before the church and be part of the vetting. Then we came down. We got it. It came down to 11, and we were going to go with the 11. There were 1 or 2 people in there. I'm thinking, gosh, I don't know. I hope it doesn't, but I'll trust the Holy Spirit, because sometimes you know things about people, And then it came down to 5, and we appointed 5 elders for our church through that process. What I loved about it is we weren't controlling. It wasn't about what Steve, Staten, and Jim Leffler wanted, or our evangelists at that time. But we also weren't going to just let the church go to Hades, So we created these mechanisms to make sure it was transparent, but run by principle and so forth.
Yeah, I'd like to see this.
Good questions. Okay. 1 Peter 5. You just listen here. We're going to spend most of our time in John 10 and Ezekiel 34. But I'll read the words coming out of the mouth of Peter there, chapter 5, verse 1. To the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's sufferings, who will also share in the glory to be revealed. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them. Not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be. Not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve. Not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. That passage even kind of answers Hank's question. You got to be willing. And that's a big component of it. Anyway, a great North Star for us here. For the heart and some things to be mindful of as an elder in the church. He's got to be careful. It can't be about dishonest gain. So I became an elder, like I said, in 2000. By the end, in 2001, I found out that staff kids had a leg up on going to Hope Youth Corps, and the process was tilted in their favor. And it made me sick. I was so sad. And frankly, I was not even in core leadership in the Chicago church. I have to tell the story so you understand what happened. My wife and I spoke up about something in 1992. We got brought before the church. It was very humiliating. We were banished to a remote area of the Chicago church, led a ministry. In 1999, people that were responsible for that had caused so much damage that they had to go on a tour and apologize to all the people. We were noted as the first people that flagged their problems. And then we got banished because of it. So we were cleared October 99. In that same month, because we responded well, Steve, are you guys open? Are you open to going into the eldership? So I was in the eldership a few months later. So, I had not known how the church was operating. It was like I was in one city and came into a new city. When I'm on the inside, I'm like, this is what these meetings are like. Oh my gosh, we got some craziness going on here. Okay. So I was literally terminating people. Like, this is not acceptable, you know, and so forth. So I found out about this hope thing, and I got in tension with people that felt like staff should have the privileges. And so this kind of thing can happen among disciples, because you can slip into entitlements and things like that. So Peter, this passage here is saying, no. It's about the sheep. It's not about you. Okay. Let's go to John chapter 10. Your official elders and elders' wives, but I would say everybody in this room, from the standpoint of these characteristics that will be influencing the wellness of this church, can learn from this. John chapter 10, verse 1. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. We all know that's talking about Jesus. There is a principle of interpretation, a hermeneutic, that requires that you know exactly what is, if you can, what is being talked about. But once you do that, you can say, what can we infer that we can further apply it to? This is not talking about elders, of course. But he's the chief shepherd. He's the dude. He's the one, the measurement. And so we don't want to miss the lesson for the Pharisees, who are not being good shepherds. Is so we don't want to enter our role in an inauthentic way. So let's enter the role with authenticity, which is process, personal example, recognition, whatever. Important, because let me ask you, how could somebody work themselves into becoming an elder in an inauthentic way, in an inappropriate way? What would be the tactics that they might use? Yes?
I think just being deceitful, because you're saying in an authentic way. I think the opposite would be to be deceitful and lie about, who they are, their struggles.
Okay, sure. Okay, that's a good one. That's very realistic. What else? Yeah.
I'm Sandy. I think maybe people that aren't open in their own life to examination, still trying to be in leadership where they're examining everybody else.
Okay. Good. Okay, very good. Yes, what else? Yeah. Manipulation. Yep. If somebody's, I always wanted to be an elder. Let me ask you, why don't we have more elders? And they're actually saying why they're not an elder. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. And it's scary. So, yes.
Divisiveness, like even sort of subtle divisiveness, like, how do you come up with that group?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, that can start to make people go, yeah, how come he's in charge, or, do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
or, like sort of that Absalom kind of situation.
Yeah. Another way, and you can never, it's hard to even deal with this, but if somebody all of a sudden turns on and is giving, loving, serving, feeding, showing up around the time that you're thinking about appointing elders, there's not much you can do about that. Who can bring it up? Bro, I wonder what your motives are for feeding the homeless.
Right.
You can't do anything about it. But you have to at least flag in your mind, gosh, man, they've been so uncommitted for the last 19 years, and all of a sudden, right? Okay. So second, know and being known by the sheep, verse 3. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought them out, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. And people watch. They watch our behaviors. And they draw conclusions. You don't know the conclusions they're drawing, but think about it. You watch people, and you draw conclusions, right? So, if we don't do that, there's something wrong with us. But sometimes the conclusions we draw are not correct. But we're drawing conclusions, and people are about you. So that can be a good thing, because if you are the person who shows up at the hospital, or you're trying to make a tragedy and a funeral more seamless in the preparations, and you just show up, stand up people, and that's who you are in their life for a long stretch. You are being the person that they know as the real deal. And so then if you have to say something to them that's uncomfortable, you have to take a little bit of risk with the relationship and help them see an area, a need in their life that they don't see. They're more likely to hear it if they know you have their best interests in mind. And that's that important. Am I communicating that well?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Verse 10 of John 10. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. When in our shepherding as elders, we are bringing out that very best in them, that our presence in their life puts them on their best A game, or at least steers them in the right direction. And we are, it's like the heliotropic principle, where a plant will lean in the direction of the sun because it gives them energy. We can be some of that, reflecting God's energy for them. I started to tell the story, but it didn't fit within that lesson as well as it fits here. When Reese Nealon and Marty Wooten had developed in LA this spiritual recovery process, they were getting ahead of the curve. I knew we had the problem in Chicago when I became an elder, but I did not know it was an epidemic, that we had a problem in our church with people that were getting chewed up by the system. Something had gone awry. So they developed this approach. And Reese had shared that they did a survey coming up with a criteria of who was qualified for spiritual recovery. And we found out that about 450 in the Chicago church qualified, of about 3,000, you know. And in reality, more qualified, but they would not even be open to going in, you know. So for 450 people, we created 6 or 7 Friday night events that they could go to instead of midweek. And here's what we did on those nights. We would have, first of all, we surveyed and interviewed people in advance. We learned about their life. We did a lot of intake. Tell us what's going on. We found out that the people that came, only about 1 out of every 5 felt like the church had wronged them, and that's why they were coming. But of the other 4 out of the 5, many of them felt like the church was so out of touch with the kinds of things that they went through, and that they weren't being fed by midweeks. It was too much about going out there and doing and getting visitors, and their needs were not being met. So we did a lot of intake. And then we would do biblically appropriate lessons to show them where God was with them on the journey through suffering. We spent a lot of time in Job. So we weren't trying to play whack-a-mole to fix them. We weren't telling them what was wrong with their response. And then just to believe and it'll be okay. We didn't do any of that stuff. We went out of our way to have empathy and step into their journey. We learned from the 1 out of 5, we had a treadmill of work, that as long as they were getting visitors and doing and volunteering, they felt God's approval because the leaders approved of them. But if they kind of got off the treadmill for a little bit to catch their breath, they felt the lack of approval, and so forth. And then I did a lesson that we did throughout the whole church 3 times called the blessing, because that's the concept in the Old Testament, about the blessing, that we're there to bring a blessing, not a curse, or to validate. And we condemned 10 things in our movement's history in Chicago. We decided not to record it because we didn't want what had happened in Indianapolis. I don't know if you know the big split in Indianapolis. And so what we did is, so from this point on, this is who we're going to be. And I remember people saying in the summer of 2001, this is like Christmas in the summer. People were mediating, reconciling, and we did. It all came out of this idea we want to bring life back. And so the Friday night events we'd study these deeper topics. We'd have food, and they're visitor friendly too. And former members were coming out, and it was like, wow, this is awesome. And then about 6 months, 8 months later, the happiest Christians in the church are those coming on Friday night. And the midweek people are like, yeah, you guys, you know, we're like, what are we going to do? We got to fix this thing, you know. And then and people stay till like 11:30. I mean, we just like, so that we look, it was an oasis. We were trying to give them life. And this was the model that I learned, and then we improvised and made it, I think, better. But when the crisis happened about 9 months after we saw we were succeeding, it was not the people that were attending Friday nights who were upset with the church. It was the people that could have benefited from that, that for whatever reason they didn't get in, that were upset, that were still in the main body of the church. So really, it wasn't 450 people that need spiritual recovery. It was probably 1,500 people that need spiritual recovery. Okay, so I'll never forget the image of that, and I deeply appreciate Reese and Marty Wooten for that, is that we want to be a blessing. We want to get inside with their journey, what's going on. And we want to help them see God's point of view. Now, sometimes we have to tell them the hard things. But really, it's walking them through that we're listening to their grief. They're having, the woman that was coming had 5 miscarriages in a row and decided to adopt. It was so big, but we were there with her, never saying, well, just trust God, you know. And we wanted her to trust God, but there's a way that you get that through that's different than all that. And so, bringing life. Anyway, any comments or questions there? Okay, verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Verse 14. I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I laid down my life for the sheep. And then he talks about I have other sheep. That's probably the Gentiles, most scholars believe, that are coming in later. They'll listen to my voice. Verse 17, the reason my Father loves me is I lay down my life only to take it up again. And basically he's emphasizing, I do this. It's my choice. I want to do this. I care. I'm really doing this. And so that's the hard stuff. This is like a symbol or metaphor or pointing to, it's the funerals, it's the counseling, it's reconciling people, and getting in there and the messy stuff. And that's the individual work of shepherding. And I believe that probably most of you are in that work already, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Or know that you have in the past and want to take your game back up spiritually with God. You want to do better because God has given to you. You want to be able to give back. But that's what this is really about. And also you will be, like a good shepherd, from time to time, you will be attacked. Because that's what they protect from the sheep, right? Or from the wolves, the things that come along. And so you have to be ready for that, since that you are the main line of defense between the sheep and the wolves. And we will see more about that in Ezekiel 34, where we're going to go next. Lay down your life means being willing to be inconvenienced. You know, that doesn't mean missing a TV show. Okay, we have DVR now, right? You know, so it doesn't mean missing a TV show. It means you were really counting on spending an evening doing something that you look forward to and enjoy.
Right.
But you got the call. And instead of saying, can we do that on Saturday? You knew you could do it tonight. You knew you weren't neglecting your spouse or your kids, that you could pull it off and be responsible and do it that night, but you didn't want to. And by the time you got to their house, you were all in. You know, we have to work on ourselves for that. It probably will never come easy this side of eternity, right? But that's what the Good Shepherd does. Let's go to Ezekiel 34. Ezekiel 34 is one of the most famous passages look, it's in many, many books on eldering and shepherding and pastoring churches. Because we know exactly how God thinks about what the roles of the shepherd are, and using the flock as the illustration. Very, very clearly. We got a multifaceted picture. Now, the downside about the passage is it's mostly condemning bad shepherds who are out to feed themselves and get fat. And the Hebrew word to describe them is they get fat and they're stiff-necked. That's what it really means. But here it's just described that they're high and they're just looking out for their best interests. But he's really, really hard on them. I did not realize until this time preparing it that the passage closes out saying that David is such a shepherd that he's put in their life. So we can take comfort in the fact that the Lord has described himself as this idealized shepherd. And here's these bad shepherds out there. But there is a human out there that's trying to be just like he is. So we can reverse these negative characteristics into what the positive ones are. And they are, real clear, verse 1. Verse 2, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Woe to you, shepherds, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves, yada yada. Verse 4, you have not strengthened the weak, healed the sick, or bound them up, or injured. You have not brought back the strays to search for the lost. You've ruled them harshly and brutally. Verse 11, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them back from the nations and gather them from the countries. I will bring them into their land. I will pasture them in the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and all the settlements of the land. I will tend them in good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. They will lie down in good grazing land, and they will feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the Lord, sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. Do you believe there's such a thing as good pride? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is good pride. This is the Lord's pride. This is what he knows he brings to the table for his people. And that he's planning to bring for his offspring in the future, to bring them in from all the remote places. This is both historically over centuries, planning to pull in the lost tribes of Israel, but this is also for the moment at hand. And this is who he is. And I believe it's appropriate for an elder, and I'm including both genders in that, and the elder and elder's wife, but I think when I'm not an elder, which I'm not now in an official sense, I want this to be me.
Right.
Okay? And you know you can take pride. I had a situation come up this last week where somebody got on a program from an event that we were doing, and they didn't get vetted for this event. And their name has been on it and on a website for a long period of time. And I have multiple events that I'm involved in this year, so this one slipped by our planning team. And so we found out that an individual had made major mistakes, that their brand was damaged, the secular position they have, with the church locally where they're at and with another church. So we have to take them off the program. And so that's going to be hard. And it's something I haven't finished the whole process with. But I said, somebody said, Steve, that wasn't on you. We didn't make the mistake. This church, they made the mistake. Yada, yada, yada. I said, it doesn't matter who made the mistake. Right. This person is going to be hurting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I said, give it to me. I'm going to help this person figure out how to recover from the situation, fix the damage in these other two churches, and go through it. Because I travel a lot, I'm not a very good shepherd back in Chicago. I'm just not. I want to be really honest with you. I've gone way too much. I've gone 9 of the last 16 weeks in Los Angeles. But can I do it in another way? Yes. I can step into the world of people that need help that are not getting it where they're at, and so I'm going to step in that way, and I'm going to do a good job. Why? Because I have pride in my brand. Okay, we're all a brand. You know, we bring something, you know, in our church. You know, if you are a founding member of the church, you guys are founding members, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's your brand. I know that's a secular concept, but okay. How committed are the old members that go back to the beginning? Okay, we're very committed because we believe in this church. Okay, so if you want to come up with a better word for brand, that's okay. Roger Lamb doesn't like when I use it. He's my friend, and I'm on the Disciples Today board. But it conveys to me, what do I represent when I walk into a room? What do I represent to my family, my wife, and all that is something we can take pride in. And so we look at these attributes. Let's break them down. I've got A through G. Strengthening the weak. Raise your hand if you think you have the capacity, just based on your journey and what God's given you, to strengthen somebody from being weak to being much stronger. Raise your hand. Okay. It's about half. What about somebody that's in a deep place, kind of darkness? Can you heal the sick, emotionally and spiritually sick? Okay, that's a smaller number there. That's about 5. Okay. Binding up the injured. Somebody had a mishap. Something went wrong at church. They had a major conflict with their leader or something. And they're disoriented and they're not processing it right. How many of you feel like you could help somebody through something like that? Okay, almost a half on that. Somebody is hardly coming to church. They're stray. Bringing back the strays. They're just kind of out there wandering, barely coming to house church. They might come to the one congregational meeting once a month, and they're just out there and nobody knows what's going on in their life. Do you feel like you would know what to do with them? Raise your hand. Okay. Third to a half on that. Okay, tending the sheep in good pasture. You know how to create an experience for people, whether it be like the Friday night spiritual recovery we had, and a way for them to go, wow, this is great. Whether it be small group, whether it be coming over and having hospitality, and just having tremendous fellowship, maybe a Bible study lesson and prayer, whatever. You could do the thing to have them go, wow, I'm glad I'm here. How many? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you know how to destroy the fat and the stiff heart? I'm just teasing. Ray goes, yeah, count me in, man. Put me in, coach. Okay, so when I ask these questions in general, I see a reluctance to raise hands, not just here today, but when I've covered this material. And I think part of it is a lower estimation of yourself than probably others have of you. If you're here, you're capable more than what I saw in the hands coming up. And you're so much more capable of that. Probably the truth is, most of us could do all of these things. But there's some we are especially more called for, right? Like, this is me. Count on me. This is mine. So now I'm going to do it differently. Who feels like they really can strengthen the weak? This is their thing. They take somebody, they can encourage them, teach them, train them, pull them together, and help them go from A to B. Speak up. Okay. Henry. Yes. All right. What's your name in the back, brother?
Michael.
Michael. Great. Michael. Okay. Good. All right. Good. Good. Diane. Good. So there's 6 people I saw hand. Like, this is their thing. Okay. Healing the sick. Those who need somebody to listen, empathize, observe, and counsel, and to do. How many people feel like that's your thing? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. We got more on that. We got about 12 on that one. That's good. Good. Older churches, like all of our churches are old nowadays, this is a big thing, right? Binding up the injured, somebody that had this mishap. They were wrongly treated by Ray. Okay. 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 So
I guess I can't raise my hand on this
do what's necessary to help them process it, also, and not get an attitude about Ray based on what you heard from that person, but also believe in that person. You can help nudge it in the direction to get them to recover. Raise your hand if that's you. Okay. See, we got more when I asked, what do you feel called for? Because we're zeroing in on the ones you want to talk about. Okay. As opposed to, we can't do all these. None of us are good at all of these. Okay. Bringing back the strays, those wanderers out there. Who feels really called for that? Okay. 1, 2, 3. You know what I think? That's the one that takes a lot of work. Because you're chasing people down sometimes. Right? And so that do you think that that's a real ministry, Ray? You probably know better than anybody. Is that an issue?
Huge.
Okay. Which illustrates another point. Sometimes we have to step into a need that's not even what we're good at or called for. You know, this is something my wife knows about me, but almost nobody else knows about me. I hate to do marriage counseling. It's not that while I'm doing it, I'm hating it. It's not that at all. What happens is it sucks the marrow out of my bones. And over the next 3 days, I'm just so emptied and weak. And like, wow. She goes, Trisha says, wow, it energizes me, it gives me life. Wow, I'm just devastated. That was so in it, I don't mind it. I mean, I feel like, you know, I like to do mediation. You would think I'd be like do marriage counseling. I'm energized by mediation. I'm not energized by marriage counseling. There might be some deep psychological thing wrong with me. But because I don't like it or I don't like the effect afterwards is not a reason not to. Right. So that's where we have to lay down our life. Okay. Who feels like you're really good with people that are lost? We're talking evangelism and people who used to be Christians that have fallen away and bringing them back. Who's really good at that? Okay, Ray, good. Evangelist, good. Okay, we have 5, I saw. Okay. Well, this is all what is taking care of the flock is. And if we're going to be in a formal recognized position, and that's both the husband and the wife, or we're going to be in an informal role around the center of it all, part of a matrix of looking out after people's needs. We have to figure out that thing about our A game with God. Who am I, Lord? What would you have me be doing? What should I be watching over? And you know you're doing well when you're doing things that you're not asked to do. You're not waiting for the marching orders. You're keeping your own list of what you're praying for, your own list of who you're looking out after. And when you get to church, you're taking a look to see who's there and who's not. Not as a, why weren't you there? We know that's counterproductive. But you care. You're just thinking. And you can only do so much. You can't do it for the whole flock of 160 some Christians. But you can do it for a chunk, you know, because you want to. And not because the title. Here's the real picker that you'll know that you're really in it for God, is if you don't get the recognition and the honor at a particular joint along the way, like when we had 11 elder candidates, only got 5 got selected. The good thing is most of those other 6 stayed in the game. Okay. It's not going, oh, they didn't recognize me. I'm just going to go back to being a Momo Christian, you know. If you're really, really in it for God, you'll stay and play. Okay. I've made a point out there that if the shepherds and elders, whatever, need to take retreats, the church should support it. Luke chapter 5, verse 16. The shepherd must take care of himself is my point, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. You remember Matthew 16, story with, and on this rock I'll build my church. I went on one of Doug Jacoby's tours of Israel in 1999, and he took us up to what's called Caesarea Philippi. We call it Caesarea Philippi when we read NIV. Caesarea Philippi. And it's in territory that's not part of, not Israel occupied. It's right north. And so you don't get out of your car because there's bombs that they haven't figured out where they're all at anymore, you know, in previous wars, whatever. So you get up to Caesarea Philippi, and there's this massive rock. There's this big hole in the rock, and it's called the Gate of Hades, according to some ancient legends. And there's these divots in the rock where gods were put up, you know, whatever, artificial gods. But there's a stream coming out from it within it, and it's one of the most beautiful places where Jesus had this speech. It all figures real nicely into the Matthew 16 moment. But it was a long haul to get there by foot. Because I think it was 45 minutes for us to drive there. So that's where Jesus had this moment, because he knew people weren't going to be following him from Nazareth or wherever, you know. So we need those places of recentering ourselves. And if you are in a shepherding role and you are not taking care of yourself, even what you're doing to help other people is going to drop to the ground. It's not going to have the impact, because they will just be words. They'll be manufactured. They'll be the engine, but not the heart behind it. So you want to be strong with God is basically what I'm trying to make. Where you are with God will amplify the impact of your work. You know. So, comments or questions? Well, that's my lesson. Yes.
I have a question. This is, I don't know, this is really a broad question, but I think it's relevant. How to shepherd, Anchorage is small. When people leave the church, what usually follows is persecution. And you're bound to run into people again, but you also have a lot of people who are hurting, who are part of the family. And I just wondered if you have any pearls of how to shepherd people through, as well as yourself, through periods of pain.
So when people leave, you're talking about then they're finding a reason to satisfy why they left. So the problem was the church, and then they speak poorly about it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, and the people that are hurting are people that are still in the church. Yeah, I get the small. I mean, that's kind of like the Midwest cities are a lot like that. Even Oahu is like that. Matter of fact, I was there for 9 weeks one time, and I was running all sorts of former members, you know. And so I get what you're saying. They don't go away just because they're gone. It helps if there was anything that contributed toward the impact of why they made that decision. If you know you're owning it and figuring it out without feeling guilty and shameful or whatever. And because inevitably over time, there's 100 people out there. There's 500. There's 1,000. Over a long journey, there's a lot of people out there. And if you can look a former member in the eyes and talk about, hey, what's going on? Here's what we learned. And you know, I realized back in the next and next year we were kind of legalistic and whatever. Come back and check it out. We're still extended family. Here's what we're learning. Here's what we're going through. It's the authenticity of being self-reflective. And again, I'm not talking about shame and feeling bad about yourself, like unnecessarily, but being self-reflective that makes it so that we can look our former members in the eye and look at our current members and know that we're doing what we can. We're doing the best that we can. And we're facing up to the lessons of our past. It's interesting, the mainline church people that have watched our movement, and a lot of them have, and they watched it from being offended and hurt at one point, and they watch it with delight now because they want to see us succeed. And we have a lot of fans out there in the mainline churches of Christ. And one of the reasons are because we have a lot of our students that are in their universities, and they constantly telling our students, and these are now mostly in the ministry. We have 26 in the Midwest. I think they have 2 cohorts in the LA church of staff members going to different universities, and they're rooting for us. Okay, they would say, "Hey, don't be dogged by what was going on." And Kit McKean and the Crete letter. You guys are so authentic. You're so transparent. I wish we could bring some of that into our church. I think we should tell ourselves those kinds of messages rather than holding ourselves hostage to the lowest moments of what wasn't right in the past.
Yeah.
And even talking about our faults. You know, like even today, I had trouble with my own countenance going into my material because I knew we had some guests here today. And I was sitting at lunch with somebody that was not a member of our church. And I'm like, do I go into any of what I do? Do I say anything that's not?
Yeah.
And I thought, I want to be real. Let's just be real. Because there are some people that draws them to the kingdom of God.
Yep.
And these people are so real. Case in point, Detroit. There's a guy by the name of Tim Sherrill and his son Colin Sherrill. And Tim's father-in-law, they were all in the ministry in a mainline church up till the crisis. And their church had a split near Detroit. So they somehow came out to the Detroit Church of Christ, which was in a firestorm with the Crete letter. I mean, it was really, really bad. There was a guy that was threatening the evangelist's life. And so what they came out and they saw the mess our movement was in. And they thought, wow, this is so cool. You guys are just putting it all out there. And you're doing that out there as a movement. I wish we would be doing that. And the senior most man was in the ministry. He's since passed away. Tim Sherrill leads the church in Omaha. Colin Farrell leads the church in Minneapolis. And they're just really incredible people. But we've got to let some of their voices get in our head about how we feel about ourselves rather than being held hostage to the Christians who have PTSD from something in the past. And when they hear the word discipling, they go, whoa, 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 we're not going to go to the past, are we? No, we're just talking about one another relationships, You know what I'm talking about, right? We have people that do that. So, yes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's probably the most common thing that I think. I'm sure it's not just here, but everywhere. You read Ezekiel, it's all negative. And that does something to us when we've had bad experiences. But that constant reminder of the good that God is doing to outweigh, because change, or when things are going smooth, everybody stays quiet.
Right.
Right, that's really the way it works. But as soon as there's some sour or some persecution or whatever is going on, that's when the PTSD or all the, and so, I would love to hear or, over a while, because it'll take a while, to continue to build a positive, faithful culture. That yes, we learn from the experiences and the negative experiences that we've gone through, but we don't keep transposing them onto the next generation.
Right.
Because we have 2 generations here. Most of those guys out here don't know nothing about a lot of our history, but often we transpose that and they think they do.
Right.
Right? So they use words like control, and I go, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Right? But because they pick it up from us, because our PTSD kicks in, right? And we think, oh, there must be control. But how, so building that culture of trusting God first, but trust together as we continue. That's a
one of the things that organizations do when they have had a scandal, like charities have had a really bad couple of years, by the way. And so have the mega churches. I don't know if you've been watching Lower 48. Whoa, like Willow Creek, my goodness.
Yeah.
And my wife was on the team that planted Willow Creek. She knows the players in the story. And so they so mishandled that, But when a church has a disruption, a flashpoint or whatever, or any kind of organization, and they have an independent look at it, or they create a sunset review or an after action, and so many different names for it, and then they stand before their stakeholders or givers or patrons or members or whatever and tell it like it really is, it somehow endears the church. They're like, I'm with the real people. There were 10 tests in Israel over 40 years. And a lot of people died in those tests. So it's not like we're not going to have failures. We're going to have scandals. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to be wrong. But it's how we process them. And the sooner we do something and we get a handle on it, then we message out, not too far, because you don't need to include everybody on everything that goes wrong, but not too little where you're being too protective. It makes people feel like we're being family. Yes.
Carrie, I guess a couple years ago, we had a group, Muslims from that group, at also meeting together, trying to figure out how to shepherd and, the elders or whatever, the younger group. And it kind of went by the wayside, so I guess I'm curious as to what's the plan of action from here on out? Like, was this just a lesson that we think about, okay, what can we do better, and then we go about our day, or is it something that, because I mean, we had some really great things going and some really great ideas that were put forth, and then it just stopped for various reasons. I mean, like house churches, things like that, but I guess I'm just curious. That's probably more of a question for Ray.
I think it is, but I think what I'm hearing from why I'm here is this is the inception of trying to develop a strategy and kind of use just at least one person as an outsider right now to be a kind of a coach, a sounding board, what works, what doesn't, develop a roadmap. But I think that question should be answered. How do we make sure this is going to be different than something else that petered out? So, good question. We'll work on that. Take that question to our conversations.
How did you handle what happened to you in '92 in spiritual?
Okay, it's happened to me twice.
92.
Okay, 92 is a good one to go with because we ended up leading the ministry really far geographically from the Chicago Church, main center, and we just built family. And I remember making this decision. This is a weird decision, but one of the best decisions. I am going to know really intimately what happened to Jesus going into Jerusalem all the way through the resurrection. So I literally studied all four Gospels, merged them all together, took history, archaeology, the medical account, and wrote a story for myself so I could process how Jesus dealt with his stuff. And my stuff was so tiny compared to what he went through, So, and that I was able to see that. I wasn't able to see it at first because my wife and I were humiliated before the church. Tricia. Yeah. And so that's how we did it. And by the way, that now looking back, of course, what else would you do? Study Jesus, right? But I thought, I'm going to study all the Gospels. I'm going to merge it all together. I'm going to write a story. And now I've looked back at what I wrote. It's so grammatically not clean. It's not, but what it did for me, the process was great. Yes.
This is sort of veering off on different topics, but how to, cope with people who are coming in from other fellowships but have no history with this fellowship, but have a lot of really negative history with another fellowship or with the church in general, and now they're here. And
can I be more specific? Are these people come from the mainline church, a Restoration Movement church, coming in? And is that it?
They're coming from ICOC that split off into a house church that got really weird, and then they were just sort of floating, and now they're here.
Oh.
That's pretty specific right there.
Is it specific? I mean, is that?
You could recreate the thing we did in spiritual recovery anytime, anyway, any place. Whether there is one for this church or it's a periodic thing for people that have specific things. But it's a journey. That's not a quick one. But you certainly want to draw them out. I'll tell you one thing. If people could learn this, and I know we got to go, if we could learn this one thing, it's best to tell your grievance story once, really fully, taking the time to put it all out there, rather than to tell it 20 times. And that's why we've got to make it a safe place to talk about grievances and draw people out. Get it once, because the story changes every time they tell it, And we do that. We mess up our grievance stories. But our grievance stories must be told just one or two times, not forever and ever. So we got to go, I think, but I'll be around.
Closing prayer. Let's close the prayer. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you so much for this day, that we can just be together as your family, your children, learning, growing, trying to do our very best for you. Thank you for the group in this room, God, who have been around your family here for a long time. Pray that you guide us, that you give us wisdom, insight. Thank you for Steve and his guidance and wisdom. Father, because all we do want to do is bring you glory and take care of your sheep. Father, again, I pray that you be with us the rest of this conference and that it brings you glory and that we just fall more and more in love with you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.